So I'll read the preamble. So this
Okay.
is a planning board subcommittee meeting of July 26th. It's just after 4 o'clock, consistent with chapter 107 of the Acts of 2022. This meeting will be conducted by remote participation. The public may not physically attend this meeting, but every effort will be made to allow the public to view and listen to the meeting in real time and participate when necessary. And so I'll turn it over to the chair to call the meeting to order.
I call the meeting to order.
There you go.
Good job, Chair.
And we'll just do a roll call of members of the subcommittee. Member Rosen
Yes, here.
and Member Rebson
Here.
and Member Bookin is absent. So since the last meeting, you have a lot of information in front of you at this point. As we kind of outlined at the last meeting and also a little bit at the planning board meeting back in June, the different places that would potentially be touched in regulation and in zoning, in the zoning ordinance, in the anticipation of potentially amending our floodplain regulations. So as we outlined, we have a fairly old, outdated section in section 5.5 of the zoning ordinance that's referred to as the lowlands, which is one place that makes some reference to the floodplain and some permitting requirements. And then we also have a section in the Code of Ordinances in the kind of the general code under a section that is called marshlands. And again, a little bit outdated, but has some updated provisions related to identifying the FEMA floodplain maps. That is a requirement to be a participant in the National Flood Insurance Program. And as Ann had kind of outlined, there's kind of this rolling updating going on as your mapping gets updated beyond just what we've had in the past, which is really more of just a map reference. There's new language requirements to be included in your local regulations, whether they're zoning or code of ordinance. So what's been proposed is, again, a real modernization of that. It does also go a little bit further to consider areas that are potentially flood prone in the future, and provides a process of really kind of just educating folks and making them think about that as they propose projects. And then we've also kind of cross-referenced and touched on other places where different types of activities get permitted, including the subdivision regulations and the various sections of the zoning ordinance that identify how things are permitted and considerations for different types of land use. So it's pretty far reaching in its base form, because I think the kind of where the rubber meets the road discussion was really more of whether this potential regulation would go above and beyond what's required under the floodplain construction standards, in which case, if you're in one of these areas, there's a building code requirement, but you do also have the ability, each individual community that has floodplain can regulate it further, either by limitation, restriction, or potentially prohibition. So that's really where certainly want to hear, from you guys on just kind of the architecture of all the changes and where they are, if you have specific questions about them. Then also your thoughts on, anything above and beyond. And as I think we talked about at the last meeting, it will be certainly a little bit above and beyond to have people start to think about these things beyond the mapped floodplain. But it really is intended to be something for them to consider. If somebody's making what is typically the largest investment in their life, if it's a residential home, whether in any type of form, to be thinking about these things and protecting that investment long term.
can I ask a question of both, all three, you, Greg, Ann, and Gemma as well, as you're in the planning department? What do you think? I know you've posited these, you've proposed this language. Do you think this is the right way to go?
I mean, I think there's no question in its base, base form. I don't think we should be building new roads in the floodplain. That's a clear one. To the extent that when a development project is in front of any board, this certainly should be part of the discussion about how they've acknowledged it, for one. I mean, we've seen plans come in that haven't even mapped these risk areas and had to say, revise your plans, show us that too. Yeah. But whether it's also consideration in a special permitted process for them, for anybody that's reviewing it to be thinking about, is this really the wisest decision? I think, again, we've been talking about this. The city council actually talked about it and planning board several years back in response to a proposal on the back shore that actually was, going to propose kind of a stilted structure on the opposite side of Atlantic Road, if you can imagine it. I mean, that's
on the water side, you mean?
Yeah,
on the water side.
Across from the new development that we approved.
Yes.
Yes.
And actually also a little bit further down the road, there were a couple of areas that folks were considering. And so, that's where, I think that line of thinking, how the federal government has kind of been responding to, first really saying, okay, if you're going to do this, then, maybe you should really be, paying more in terms of what might happen with the knowledge that we have, that it looks like it's going to be happening. You should be carrying more of the weight in premium. And I did check, and I don't know if Ann has checked with her channels, but as far as I understand from the state, they are still intending to move forward with regulating the highest risk areas through a prohibition. So
what do you mean exactly, Greg? Prohibition of development?
Prohibition of not of any development of new residential construction in the V zone, in the highest risk, the velocity zone, where it's beyond just a still water elevation of flooding. It's also with the wave energy of waves of 3 feet or greater that is really kind of the highest risk area. And again, we kind of wait whether or not they do that. But it certainly seems like Massachusetts is heading in that direction of regulating these areas. They've had the jurisdiction to do so for, since the 70s, I guess, Ann, 70s, 80s, of defining the resource area, but just haven't had any kind of regulation in place. And they've drafted and proposed to do just that, but they haven't initiated it yet.
And what's the likelihood, if that gets drafted and initiated, that it would be accepted in the time frame for that?
Accepted in what time frame?
Passed on the part of the state.
So it's an interesting process. They get to change their regulations like the planning board gets to change their regulations. If you make a change, you notice a public hearing and you do so, I mean, there are certain limitations in terms of what you can say you can and can't do, and what you can put in place for standard. But that's the process. So the intention would be that they would have public hearing. I don't know, maybe modify or not, but they're kind of the decider that at this point, they've indicated that they've gone through their legal review. They've drafted it and they can enact it, but they would have to follow their public process to do so.
So like we talked about last week, it was one of the questions I think that Jane raised is, do we let the state come out in front of this before we do it or not? Right?
Right. And you can certainly do that if
More to the
everything.
point, you let them be the bad guy.
Yeah.
Because
That's totally, that's
Yeah.
totally fine. Not everyone, again, I think Ann had pointed out, there are some communities that have these types of restrictions and have taken that step. But, the consideration part of it, the making sure that people are following the standards that they have to follow, all of that is everything but, those 2 points of either saying in these areas you can't or you can't expand, and then potential limitation in the A zones. And again, the question of limitation is a little bit different. That's the state is kind of taking this hard no kind of position potentially in the high velocity areas, but it's a broader discussion for what happens in the A zone areas, which we talked about a percentage increase and that type of thing. Again, that's entirely up to the board and up to the council ultimately, if that's the case.
Mhm.
may I?
Sure.
I was just going to move on to another topic if you have more to add on that.
Well, yeah, maybe Ann wanted to add something. I saw her trying to speak a couple of times.
That's all right.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten any further updates, so I'm interested that you have, Greg. That's, the delay has been the only reason I've been wondering if it's going to happen at all. Frankly, my presumption is that it will at some point, because all signs are that we're going to next have a Democratic governor. So I feel like even if it doesn't happen now, it will happen later. But that's the V zone restriction. They aren't proposing they'll have different kinds of restrictions on the A zones, but it's more about impervious surfaces and those kinds of things. So the restriction of expansion to 15% is, the state's not going to come in and do that for us. I think sort of my answer, for what it's worth, to the initial question is, I would fully respect if the V zone and the A zone restrictions right now don't feel like a step too far, and let's let the state do it. That I think that's a completely understandable point of view. I think the rest of the language I wholeheartedly would encourage. I think it's some of it, the floodplain language will be a little new and different for cities and towns, but again, I think it's advisory in the sense of just requiring people to think about things. The rest of the special permit kind of language, Winthrop actually just adopted last week, so you won't be the first there. And other communities have different kind of language. Swampscott has other stronger floodplain language about sea level rise, but I feel like this is both sort of forward looking and maybe staking out new ground, but also really doable and not onerous.
May I suggest that we go over each of the documents? It seems like there's 3 main documents, not including the checklist, which seems pretty like a no big deal. So there's 2 documents under the GZO, and then there's 1 under the rules and regs for subdivisions. So could we do that way?
Yeah, I think I've got it all ready to
Share the
go.
screen.
Yep.
And my first question for which one are you doing, Greg? Actually,
I can do whatever you like. So
let's do GZO section 1.
Okay, and that one was in. Do you know them by the order number?
No, I'm afraid I don't.
Okay, I think that was. Yes, this.
It's not subdivision rules and regs. Yeah.
Yeah, it's this one.
Okay. Just a matter of procedure. So any change to the zoning ordinance gets recommended by us to city council and then has to be approved by city council with a majority or a supermajority.
So these are not really impacted by any lowering of the threshold of votes. So it would be a 6 of 9 vote.
Okay.
And it would be both a public hearing by the city council and the planning board. But
Okay.
you're right, recommending, the first question, at a future planning board meeting will be, do you initiate these as amendments, and then it comes back down.
Okay.
Planning board, public hearing, city council, and then 6 of 9.
Great. So the red obviously is your added language. And someone stop me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, can you make that larger, Greg, please?
I can.
And it seems all throughout you've added this same language in number 7, which seems really, I don't think anyone could have any problem with the fact that this is just an added criteria that you have to look at for these various types of permits. I think that's great. I do have one question. Are we going to be killing ourselves every time? Are the sea level rise maps going to be updated every 5 minutes? And then, we're going to have to go back and change the dates to protect the innocent and go through city council with all that jazz?
I don't think so. They're exceedingly expensive to develop. So I could be wrong, but the way they develop them, they describe them as 2030, 2050, and 2070.
Wait, who's they?
Well, the Woods Hole Group developed them for the state.
Okay.
But those dates may change, but 2.4 feet, as long as we're referring to the 2.4 feet, those
Yeah.
projections, I don't think they will be doing again anytime soon. They're not
Well,
going to run a
I
whole.
just wondered if it was worth it to put in language like the probability and depth, which are shown on the most current sea level rise maps on file with city clerk, instead of actually referring to a date. Wouldn't that save a lot of trouble?
Good point. Good
I think,
point.
yeah.
Or even if you wanted to call them no, because the sea level rise number could change in 10 years, right? So, yeah. Okay, so that was my comment throughout. That's everywhere you have that statement.
So would you take out? You would take out the reference to 2.4 feet of sea level rise? And
No,
just say,
no.
No, just the date.
Yeah, just the date.
okay.
Well,
But then if you wanted to change the map,
right. I might say the 1% chance storm with sea level rise, take out 2.4 feet. I don't know. I don't know.
So, Anne, do you, is there a publicly available state mapping right now? Because I know yours was, we're talking about kind of tailoring it so that you can see, it's a map that shows, the FEMA floodplain as well as the 2.4 superimposed kind of.
Yeah.
Is there a state data set that's like identified by map and title?
Yeah, that we can pin it to.
yeah, exactly. It's not yet available on Mass GIS. I think CZM is
Okay.
planning to make it available, but it isn't, which is why, and I kind of feel like, I'm trying to think, I mean, we could say something generic, the sea level rise maps provided by the city of Gloucester.
Well, I think if you name it sea level rise and you say it's on file with the city clerk's office, that's fine. And if you're trying to make the point, because when people read it, you're trying to make the point of the 2.4,
Yeah.
you could say in parentheses, as of, May 2022, this number is 2.4, or, something like that, something that brings in the number, but doesn't stick you to it.
So maybe you should just say the most current sea level rise map
On file.
on file.
Right.
And then, there may be some people may need some explanation of where it came from.
Right.
What it
But
does
I'm just saying,
represent.
if you put in a parenthetical that said, as of a certain date,
Okay.
it is this.
Yeah, I'm wondering if, again, maybe the parenthetical after the May 4th, or more recent version on file, just because I think we should still package it. If we're gonna have another map, because then it could be one of those things of like, well, which one is it? So
Okay, well then
yeah.
you need a full sentence that says, unless there is or in the case of a more recent map, this supersedes the May, like a legal statement. I can't come up with it off the top of my head right now, but do you know what I'm saying? Not, and I'd love a sentence that's more direct that says, if a more recent, a more recent
Yeah.
map on file with the city clerk will supersede the May 1st, 2022 map.
So here's my question, because right now there's mapping available for 1.2 feet, 2.4 feet, and 4.2 feet. So we made a choice. Even if you make this language more generic, won't there still need to be a process for deciding?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I think we're going to be, if we're going to use another data set and another map, we might have to revise. Because I think, unless we were, so like with FEMA, that's, people have done that before where they'll say the most recent,
FEMA map,
issue of the FEMA flood maps or something like that. And that's, kind of shifts that authority, changes it, and it becomes part of. But here, where we're kind of saying that's why I was wondering if the state had done it, because then we could have pointed to the state's most up-to-date version of that mapping. And if not,
I guess, Jane, the thing I would say is if some point down the road if the state were to do another update, it isn't even guaranteed it would be 2.4 feet. They might look at something different. So that's why
I just would hate to go back. This is not easy to go to the city council. I can't find my glasses, which are on my head. I hate to have to go back.
I definitely hear that, but I don't know. I mean, Greg, who would get to
we don't
decide?
have to decide that right this
Okay.
second. I just want to make that as a point.
Yeah, absolutely.
But otherwise, I think it's like all you're asking for in this section is that people add this to the criteria for their various types of developments. And I think that's 100% appropriate. And I can't imagine anyone not agreeing.
Yeah.
I think one of the other things it also does is it avoids what has happened in the past where somebody gets a use permit from either the zoning board or the planning board, and then they still have to go to the city council on this narrow issue that they generally are not really, it's not usually their purview. These issues come up at the Conservation Commission. They can come up, in technical reviews at the planning board. Zoning board should be certainly more aware of this. They've done things in the past, like issue variance from the definition of lot and allowing a floodplain lot to then comply for construction. And I think this would be sending the clear message, don't do that. So I think what it does is it starts to put this as a consideration, as it should be for anyone that's issuing a permit, rather than and consolidating that discussion at the same time that someone's reviewing, the use permit at the same time. So I think it's a good thing.
Okay, me too.
I would agree.
Okay, great, David.
Now you're getting to you just pulled a little bit past it, the adding
Yeah,
of.
sorry.
Well, I don't need
There
to
you go.
go over the rest of it because I agree with all of it.
Oh, okay. So,
Okay.
because that's to me, more significant is saying that you can then judge giving the permit. I just want to make sure could you just pull down a little bit? If you're fine, I won't belabor it. But
Yeah.
No, just, am I missing something?
so under the 1.83 standard to be applied, there's a new factor, in addition to thinking about neighborhood character, social structure, its vulnerability to flooding and flood damage, taking into consideration projections.
Yeah, totally agree.
Okay,
Agreed.
just want to make sure.
It's completely reasonable to
Yeah.
ask for this information.
Yeah, and what I've said when, Ann and I met, and Jem and I met with kind of a small group, kind of saying, this is a project that we're working on, and here's the context and where things are in other communities and the state's perspective. This has been coming up in discussion at permitting hearings for at least a decade, and to not have it, as
Makes
a
us look
consideration,
stupid.
even though you're considering it, I mean, you're thinking about these things. It should be consideration.
Yeah.
So that's where
Okay,
it belongs.
All right, let's go to the next GZO thing.
Okay. And then that's all through all the special permits.
Yeah. So, and you two can think about if there's a way to
Yeah.
generalize the site map, the floodplain map. Okay, so here's my question about this. First of all, what is 12.27 or 1-227? I couldn't, the first line there.
So that is the section in the Code of Ordinances, marshlands. It's really, it's
Not
kind of
in
the,
the-
it's in the
not in the
Code of
G-
Ordinances.
I think that's actually your floodplain bylaw. Is that the one that
Yeah.
actually references the map? That's your floodplain bylaw. It's like
Yeah, so
couple
that's in the
sentences.
Code of Ordinances. So it's the general code. It's not the zoning ordinance. So that's where everything
Okay.
else happens. If you go on to, actually, we're right here. If you go onto the city
Yeah,
website.
thank you.
And wow, everything is slow today. So if you just go to the main under government, so we have the zoning ordinance, and then we also have Code of Ordinances.
Mm-hmm.
And if we go to 1227, that's where there's a, we currently comply with, so see there, it's called marshlands.
Oh, I get it.
And then if we
Okay.
go down, well, let's just take a look so everybody knows what we're talking about. So this is where we reference the National Flood Insurance Program and the rate maps. And this is one of our compliance things. So if you are having folks in the community that are applying for and carrying flood insurance, and there are things that can be done to try to create discount in that in another program, but to participate, you have to basically say, yes, we have on file and we utilize when we review building code and applications, this set of flood maps.
I'll
Okay.
just say that I've looked at all 101 of the floodplain ordinances from MAPC. I couldn't find yours. In our first meeting, I said to Greg, "Are you sure you have one?" Like, I've never seen anything this minuscule with no purpose, no nothing else. Like, it's
Yeah,
it's complete,
okay.
you know.
So we're deleting that and it'll just be gone and there will be nothing in the Code of Ordinances. Everything will rely
It'll
on
be in zoning.
a new
correct.
section 5.5. Okay, great. And where did all this language come from? This language for 5.5?
So, Greg, this looks like the blue is no longer
Yeah,
showing.
Oh, no, it's
No,
there. It
no,
is. It's
I have
there.
blue.
Oh, okay.
There we
So,
go.
so
But the
everything.
whole,
so
the whole
everything-
thing is new.
Everything in dark print is the state model by ordinance that you'll
Okay.
be required to adopt when you next have a flood map. So essentially, you just be doing it a little earlier than you're going to be required to do it.
Required
then-
to adopt, sorry, when we get in,
When
there's
you
a
get
new-
a new, when FEMA updates the maps next, the state will require that you
Okay,
adopt all the language in black. But I have to say 7 is also an addition. 7 and the purpose should have been in blue, but the
oh, okay, okay.
so
And has this been reviewed by anybody but us? Like,
I sent it to Joy Dupro, who's the state person who wrote the model, to make sure that she was good.
So is 7, are you saying, Ann, that 7 is not part of the state
Correct,
piece?
Is
And,
this-
and you've added this?
exactly. Because it references sea level rise and just is a little stronger on purpose.
okay, but this also refers in 5.5.4 refers to the May 1, 2.4.0 sea level rise map. So is
Correct.
that a thing that the state?
No, you know what? None of the blue is here, Greg.
Huh.
I think I could share my screen if that.
Okay, let's do that.
Make sure this works. Is that it? Are you able to see this?
Yeah,
Yes.
the
Okay.
blue's not super blue, but.
Yeah, it isn't. I'll try and highlight it. So the 7 is one place. And then distinguishing the federal floodplain district from the future floodplain district. So basically, if you used only the state model, you'd only have the 5.53, you wouldn't distinguish. And so then I think some of this we've dealt with in the comments. So
So
this
all of 5.4 is blue.
Right.
is blue.
Yeah, so
Okay.
that's the part where we're saying that, again, for all uses, whether they're special permitted or not, we're having them look at these areas above and beyond the mapped floodplain.
Okay,
Yeah.
So just to know like some of the conversation with the state, this last couple sentences, it says it's for the purpose of understanding and planning, and that state resistant construction codes apply only in the federal floodplain district. That's sort of to stay on the right side of recognizing.
so are you trying here, you're trying to delineate the federal floodplain district from the future floodplain? So you're saying Gloucester has a larger, okay, you're adding floodplain to the federal floodplain district, and you're
Correct.
trying to make this apply to the larger.
Basically, the needing to look at the new maps will require to both districts.
Okay, yeah, I get it.
The reason to separate them is that the building code applies only to the
Only
federal
to-
floodplain district, and we
Okay.
will get in trouble if we try and apply it elsewhere.
Got it. So can you just describe to me in words without showing me a map what is the future floodplain risk district that is not encompassed by the federal floodplain district?
So it is not terribly different. It's slightly larger in some areas. So
Okay.
it's
It's
The
like
different-
adding a thin little ribbon in some
Okay.
areas
Yeah.
around the outside edge.
and in
That's
some
perfect.
areas it doesn't extend as far as the flood map. So
Okay,
it's very similar, but yes, that idea of a kind of a ribbon around the current map is.
okay, I
prevalent.
love that. Okay, and then I just have the same comment about, and then this first paragraph, the 2.4 is sea level
Yeah.
rise map dated. Okay,
Yeah,
Right.
figure that out.
okay,
So I'm gonna keep scrolling.
okay, pause for 1 second. I know this is state language, and this is really helpful because I guess we probably wouldn't change the state language. But it says the city of Gloucester requires a permit, and then Gloucester's permit review process includes the requirement. But it doesn't say what type of permit. Do they mean a building permit? Do they mean a special permit? I mean, what do they mean? And should
I
we-
think they need a building permit. I could ask Joy about that.
It just seems like we have a lot of special permit stuff, and that would be worth,
Just gonna highlight that so I don't forget.
yeah,
Yep.
that would be
Question.
worth clarifying.
Okay, I'll ask her.
And then just the editor in me hates the second paragraph because it says, the process includes the requirement the applicant obtain all local, state, and federal permits. And then the next sentence says the applicant must acquire all necessary permits. Well, you just said that.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, but I'm not sure we want to fight with them.
Okay,
But I'll double check on these things, see if
Okay.
anything's changed.
And then here we are again with the blue language. Okay, same comment about that. right.
And just not to beat the dead horse on that one. I think we're going to want to actually leave it as is, saying this is the established map. If we're going to increase that or change that in any way, we're just going to have a public process around it. And if
Okay.
that's something that's 5 years or 10 years from now, and it's a fairly narrow discussion about adopting another map, but everything else stays the same, I think we just have to go through that
Okay.
process.
I respect.
So just a question about the future flood risk. That is something that map is something that's established by the state, correct?
It
Or
was,
by Gloucester?
it's
a-
developed by the Woods Hole Group under contract to the Mass Department of Transportation.
It's
Okay.
basically
And
the 2.4 sea level rise map.
And it's
Yeah.
what the state is using for all its,
Yep.
work. But they have, and another sort of thing that makes it harder for us, they haven't yet put it on GIS, which would make things easier, but
Okay,
nothing's easy.
so next section, and Anne, now that I'm looking at it with you, can you tell me which part is you think is going to be done by the state sooner or later?
So I think they're gonna do the V zone restrictions. They're gonna
Both of
ban
them?
new alteration expansion. Yes, both of them. And they are not proposing that this particular A zone restriction. They'll be sort of tighter about needing to be sort of protective and maybe less. I think in coastal A zones, which you have a little bit of, but not a lot, they're going to require properties to be on pilings. But their language is more about kind of not diverting water, less impervious surface, some of those things.
Okay, so I think having given this much thought in the past week, I'd rather leave the first part, the VE zone stuff, to the state, but I'm okay with doing the AE zone stuff. I don't know how David feels about that.
Yeah, I mean, if we had a better sense of when things were going to happen with the state, it'd be helpful to know. You mentioned, Anne, that there were a number of towns that already had adopted regulations like this.
That have, there's a small number of towns that have V zone prohibition. Yeah.
Rockport being one of them.
Rockport being one of them.
Okay. And do you know whether there was opposition? Has there been opposition to it?
I really don't know anything,
Yeah.
even in any of the towns. A couple others on the Cape. Situate's had theirs for a long time. I honestly, I think the amount of controversy is directly proportional to the number of affected properties.
We have 580 or something like that, which doesn't seem like a big percentage, but still seems like a lot of people.
So we can always, if we leave that first section out under the VE zone, we can always come back and revise it again.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. And again, if it becomes a state requirement, then the buck will stop
then
with
it's
the
in.
Conservation Commission.
Have to do it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's the way to go.
I mean, I guess to Anne, I guess it would just, you might not necessarily even, well, I suppose the things that relate to, I mean, if they're all going to be regulated through the Wetlands Protection Act, then the Conservation Commission will have that as standard.
Yeah, they'll be required.
Whether, I mean, you could always belt and suspenders and put it in the zoning ordinance so that, you know, sometimes people start a process by looking at the zoning ordinance and it would be very overt that you can or can't do these things.
And you know, that being said, I think it would just be this committee's recommendation to the full planning board. I mean, I'd much rather hear everybody's opinion on this. And I don't want you to delete that section just because David and I agree.
No, I mean, I think we kind of, we've heard that, you know, Rick participated in the early part, you know, and I think, you know, that step of getting out ahead of it is the question. So so that one, I think, you know, that's fine. I'm more interested to hear what you have to say about the second one that you kind of think might be appropriate at this point, because that might have a larger impact on a many
Yes.
more properties.
So that's 1,500, 1440.
Yeah, I want to be clear that, you know, I would, in the ideal situation, I would want to keep this in the VE zone, but I think we're going to get a tremendous amount of pushback and we have a better case if the state adopts the language.
And we can use all our ammunition. Well, I don't know. The other negotiating tactic, of course, would be to put it all in and then be really magnanimous and take out the VE stuff and just keep the AE stuff in and make everybody feel better.
That's an approach.
I mean, you know, really and truly, the other way to do it is just keep the VE stuff in. And if literally anyone disagrees, we can take it out and keep moving. I don't know. I just don't want it to draw a lot of attention. I don't think that people think that they want to expand their houses by much more than 15%, honestly. On the ground. I mean, people are pretty maxed out on their setbacks and everything anyway. I see this as a little stealthy, like I doubt people will notice it or think about it or really think about what it means.
I think they'll absolutely know what this means and they'll
You
think about it.
do?
I do. And we talked a lot about, you know,
The right
what's the or-
percent.
what's the origin of the number? What does it mean? But, you know, I just think too, and we're really talking about, you know, the on the ground, right? We're talking about, you know, that's where this is starting to put a limit on, you know, when someone does a tear down rebuild, you know, that limitation of footprint size. You know, if there's a 900 square foot, you know, we certainly see 2,000 square foot foundations.
Yeah, I know.
So, you know, so
So-
that's where, you know, 15% is pretty limiting depending upon how the existing size of the structure. So I think
So-
you will get some
Yeah.
people saying, well, you know, if I had a 1,500 square foot foundation and I can expand, but that's far greater than somebody with a smaller foundation to begin with and what they're allowed to do.
Right, so why did you decide to do 15% increase instead of a lot coverage? And also, what about a vacant lot? Because that seems unfair. If there's a vacant lot and they're still allowed to build as the biggest thing as they want, whereas, you know, somebody who already has a house is penalized.
Mhm.
Well, they're allowed to build the biggest thing they want outside of the AE zone. Right?
No, it doesn't say new construction is prohibited in the AE zone, but maybe it should. Or it could say new construction and any renovation cannot be more than X% of lot coverage, which would get them all.
Yeah, so this is a challenging one. You know, again, I think you'd have to really think about all of the coastal areas and what they're zoned, because it would mean something different for an R10 versus an R20 versus an R30.
True.
In terms of, but lot coverage might be one of those things to consider. Again, that's a whole different section of the ordinance, needs to be carefully considered if it's going to be a part of this kind of grouping of different changes. But it's, you know, again, it's one of those, it's a big deal thing. And Anne, I'm not sure if we're thinking about this in the context of a vacant lot.
No, I think your point is well taken.
Yeah.
Jane. Maybe there's not a logic to this. I sort of thought of these as either both in or out. Like it would seem funny to regulate the A zone and not the V zone to me, but maybe that's just, and I did actually think the A zone would be more challenging because it affects so many more properties. I would expect that would.
I mean, to me, it seems that if you're like along that line of thinking, if you're going to be regulating the A zone, then there should be limitations at least on expansion in the V zone, if not prohibition. You would, I mean, you're basically saying limit your risk in
That's
these
right.
areas,
Yeah.
but you know, that's where, you know, it gets a little bit more, it's so much easier to say yes or no. When you get into in between, that's where it's a long discussion.
Okay, so what if so I still can't in all good conscience propose no new construction. But what if we treated AE and VE the same right now, knowing that a stricter VE state regulation is coming soon?
I mean, and two, you know, I think that the biggest question would be, is what does it mean for new construction?
Yeah.
Because if you think about percentage related to the structure starts to deal with the scale. If the
Yeah.
structure was large to begin with, it can be bigger. If it was small, it could be a little bit, so I mean, it deals with the question of scale, but I don't know, the question of equity is what is gonna come into the
Yeah.
equation somewhere.
So what this, I don't think through this chart that you made, which says the parcels with buildings in the AE and the VE, are these conforming buildings or non-conforming? Or they're all of them, because
they were probably based on the building being in those zones and didn't really go as far as looking at all the dimensional
Yeah.
requirements.
If it's the work we did, it was building footprint.
Yeah.
right, I'm just thinking that it's this, so this number is less than you think, because a lot of the stuff in the AE and the VE zones are non-conforming. So they can't go outside their existing footprint anyway, right?
Well, they can.
I mean,
They
they
can-
can, if
they
the
can go-
ZBA
Right.
lets them, but
Right. So
Yeah.
that's where, this would provide some guidance.
Yeah.
Now, it would be a new dimensional standard in some way.
yeah,
And then somebody could say, I want relief from the 15% because these are the specifics of my property and,
Yeah.
it was only a 900 square foot and we'd like to try to do this, and they could present that case.
right.
But otherwise, this would be a new dimensional requirement.
How did you come to the 15%? As above, wouldn't somebody just say that's an arbitrary number?
I think you could make the argument it is. We looked at the range of all the bylaws I'd found that are everywhere from no expansion to 30%. There wasn't a science to it, that's for sure.
Okay,
Um,
all right.
I mean, again, I think the other way you could think about it, and it could be variable, is lot coverage. I mean, if you were to think about, what's, some sort of reasonable envelope, you back calculate, and that's, I mean, that's something you can see, across the board, in different communities. I mean, we have fairly forgiving lot coverage, particularly in smaller lot districts.
Right.
So, that's something to think about. Whether it gets put into here, this dials it into the size of the structure. It still leaves unanswered what it means for, a vacant lot or a newly divided lot, which, that's a tricky one because, again, percentage of something there, and then the new one comes in and, in an R10 district, they can do 25% lot coverage, so they can do a 2,500 square foot foundation. Whereas a 900 foot times 1.5, you're or plus 15% is much
Bigger.
very limiting.
Oh, the other way, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and also just curious, when you threw this in, why just the VE and the AE? So the FEMA flood zones, why did you not include the floodplain overlay district, which is including the other map?
So we certainly didn't try to put any restriction on areas that are not currently mapped. Is that what you're referring to? The
No,
future?
I'm just saying this regulation talks about, the FEMA map plus the sea level rise map and the future, the regular floodplain overlay district and the future floodplain flood risk district. And then you revert in this section, you revert just back to FEMA, right? Because isn't FEMA AE and VE?
Yes, that's
Yes.
correct. That's an interesting point. I think
Yeah.
you could, I'm trying to think about the building code, because you actually can prohibit. That's some of the things you can do.
Yeah, I mean,
despite
I'm
the
not
building code.
suggesting we do.
Yeah.
I'm just really curious about how we arrived there.
I think I was looking at sort of examples around the state, and of course there wouldn't have been examples of that. I also think it's a lot, I'd have to think about it. I don't think there's a particularly good answer for that. I think we could have thought about doing that. I think one thing is you can't know for areas that are in that ribbon that is in the future flood zone and not in the current flood zone, they have no definition. They're not AE or VE. So you'd have to say something different if you wanted to say anything about them. And so it would be a little hard to know
Yeah,
what
right.
would be the appropriate thing to say.
Yeah. Yeah, and then when the state comes out with its regulation, it would make it even more complicated.
Yeah.
Well, we don't have to decide this right now.
But I will say, I think you've poked some holes in the AE language that, I don't know about you, Greg, but give me a little pause.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and again, I think when this was the language and the approach that's been taken in other places. I'm curious what they do in that situation. But again, I thought, something that would be certainly more equitable would deal with lot coverage. If you feel like the lot coverage right now is too forgiving, and it doesn't, and many of some of these, and I'm wondering if there's a way to identify through this ordinance lot coverage on a lot encompassed by or with a what I'm talking about, like maybe it's something that's specific to being within this district, that
Or you could
the lot
say,
coverage requirement is reduced, versus just saying in these districts it was 25 and now it's 15.
This
or,
is just
whatever
what
it
I
might
want to do, is get back into the use tables. Dying to do that right now.
Don't worry, it's dimensional tables, not use.
It does,
Still, dimensional tables, been there too.
to some degree, this does make me feel like the wetlands, the state language that they propose both for the V zones and the A zones is very much focused on flood impacts, and it sort of makes an argument to me to let them hopefully adopt their regulations for both zones that are tailored to flooding concerns.
So are they doing regulations for the AE zone?
Yes, I can I don't think I can quit. I can afterwards, I can send you. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
All right, so let's.
So here,
What do we want to do here? Because I'm mindful of the time. And
yeah. So
I'd
why
like
don't
to
we
see
do
whatever else blue language there is. Yeah.
I think there might be
this? I
none.
think that's it.
Oh, you know
That
what?
was
There's
it.
only adding this is the substantial damage. The reason to add these is that this is something that doesn't always get complied with, and it's good to have it in writing what the language is.
Okay. Also,
these are definitions. Okay.
They're just definitions.
You don't define future flood area, do you, somewhere?
We define it by the map.
Okay.
So maybe we can spend some time just thinking about an alternative, but I guess like Ann said, maybe this is something that waits, those regulation pieces above and beyond. Otherwise, we can take a look at, whether it would make sense to make a reference to lot coverage relating to lots that are encumbered by the floodplain. Because if you're 100% dry lands and you're not, we have R10, right. We have R20 all over the place.
Yeah.
Are we gonna put a further restriction on those lots in terms of their their lot coverage? That's a broader question. But if it's really about the flooding impact piece of it, maybe that would be for structures located in the floodplain, structures on lots located in the floodplain, the maximum lot coverage shall be.
Yeah, with any
That
portion located in the flood zone.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Okay, before we go, I have one more other quick question. The rules and regulations governing the subdivision of land. Now that's a process that's different than sending it to city council, right? That's just planning board.
Solely planning board.
Okay, great.
Yep.
So, and the only really thing with teeth in here is saying no subdivision roads should be located in the floodplain overlay district. Everything else is all what we've discussed.
Right.
So I think that's perfectly appropriate because
Yeah.
the city should not be maintaining roads in the floodplain district, floodplain,
And
whatever.
the only other thing that you could also think about, which we didn't really, I mean, we mentioned it in the working group kind of before all this, is also back to the definition of lot. This kind of came up a little bit in response to some of the zoning discussions over the last 6 months about, too much in sensitive areas. We allow, even in some of our smaller lot districts, a large portion of a new lot to be wetland. And the floodplain is defined as a wetland resource. So that's another potential area that would, protect those areas to some degree from encroachment of development right up to the edge of these resource areas. But it also might address another way to address the new lot consideration. If someone were to divide a lot and you said you have to have the required upland for the district or you have to have the required lot area for the district as dry
Only
land,
upland, yeah.
Right.
then you would be giving somebody 10,000 square feet to locate a home, and it wouldn't be in the floodplain. So that's another, maybe that's another way to think about it.
Is that a problem, Greg, from your point of view?
I mean, look, you see the A&R applications, you see lots that are coming in that are in an R10 district that are having 7,500 square feet of dry land and then 2,500 of wetland or more, but they only have to have 7,500. And we're pushing the envelope. I mean, and everything gets sent to the commission and they go, how did this happen? Well, it starts with the definition of a lot. So, and I can understand that, the larger lot districts, it may be less of a concern. I mean, you're in an acre district and you have to have 30,000 square feet of dry land. A little bit different, but when you're in those smaller lot districts, we're getting lots that are, right to the limit. And then
Right.
if you were in a floodplain area and you were trying to divide out lots, again, you could have floodplain coming up on, at least, a quarter of that property and only leave you a limited area for development, which might have some.
Is there some language that you could provide to us that would address that?
I mean, it would certainly be, if it's taking away that allowance for a percentage of the lot to be wetland in those smaller lot districts, it's in the definition of lot. We can take a look at that too.
Is that in the GZO or regulations? Must be
That's in the GZO and the
Yeah,
definition of lot. And lot is actually it's actually also defined further, I think, in section 3 in the dimensional requirements section.
Okay.
Okay, just procedurally, so it sounds like we're going to see another iteration of this before we turn it back to the planning board?
I mean, we can certainly do this again. We could meet in subcommittee again. We can try to refine this a little bit so that you guys feel like, yeah, this is what we talked about. We might have Beverly back as well to have her chime in and then bring it back to the board. Or we can work on, bringing up approaches and bring it back to a full discussion of the board. It's really up to you.
I don't care. What's easiest for you, Greg? What's most expeditious?
Right.
It's usually easier to pull together 3 people than, I mean, otherwise we put it on, as an agenda item on the planning board and whatever that night holds. And then we get to the end of the meeting and everybody's tired.
Okay,
And
so bring it back to us then.
Okay, we'll do that.
Right, David?
Yeah, I think that's right. And, and you're going to make those changes to the earlier sections that we were looking at before, right? In terms of the comments that Jane had made about how we're going to reference that May 1st, 2020 date.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we should probably hold to that, because if there's going to be a re-release or a reconsideration of the extent, I think you just have to revisit it. So I think we'll be okay
Fine. Yeah,
for a while.
I wasn't bringing it up to advocate. I
Yeah.
was just bringing it up to.
Yeah, it could be one of those things like when somebody puts a fee in an ordinance and you want to change it, and you got to go through
Yeah,
a public hearing process, a noticing requirement and all that stuff. It's costly to do it. So, understood.
Okay, so
so we'll wait to hear back from you.
Just set up
Yeah,
another.
so
date.
we have I think we're actually not going to have the planning board meeting next week. I don't think we have a quorum. So the
That
next
works.
regular meeting will be on the 18th. So we can circulate via email and try to come up with a time after we've done a little debrief and a little bit more work on this in maybe a couple of weeks.
okay, all right,
Sound good?
sounds good.
Okay, 5:04, a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Unless you were trying to say something, David.
No,
Oh,
I'm not.
Okay.
Greg called it and you seconded it. Roll call
okay.
vote.
Okay, Member Rosen,
Yes.
Member Remsen.
Yes.
Okay, have a good night. We'll be
Thank
in
you.
touch soon.
Bye. Thanks,
Thank you
everybody.
both for your
See you.
Thanks,
questions.
Ann.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.